Hi there, I'm J.R. Kerr, CEO at Handshake, and I want to welcome you to Vaccines for All, unique partnerships for an equitable end to the pandemic. We all now know that over the last 18 months, we've seen that the world has been laid bare. We live in a world that's different from the one that we thought we had entering into 2020. We had these broad, ambitious goals within the SDGs and within the vision that the Pope has put forward in the Laudato Si. And what we realized over the course of the last 18 months is that this pandemic has shown us that the world we live in now is in need of new and dynamic partnerships, new alliances to meet the world's most pressing needs. Today is about those alliances. Today is actually about an organization that wants to bring forward unique alliances between the private sector, the public sector, and faith-based organizations. Before 2020 happened, something called the Global Solidarity Fund was brought into action by partners like the Gates Foundation and a host of other organizations, all with the purpose of bringing unique partnerships and alliances to bear for the world's most marginalized populations to ensure that we would equitably develop the world on their behalf with them on their behalf. Now that we have this vaccine to distribute around the world, we face a real challenge, a challenge of trust in the vaccine, a challenge of how to get the vaccine to the ends of the earth, and a challenge of how to do so in an equitable way. The conversation today is about just that. It's about partnering between the public, the private, and faith-based organizations in order to equitably distribute the vaccine. It's my honor to introduce you to a real leader and actually a friend of mine that we actually met through the pandemic, Marta Guglielmetti, who is the executive director of the Global Solidarity Fund. Before her leadership at the Global Solidarity Fund, she worked in the international development world for 20 plus years across all three sectors, serving at a host of different UN agencies and philanthropies, also serving at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She also happened to serve within Catholic institutions, which makes her uniquely adept and experienced to bring the strengths of these unique alliances to bear. Marta, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for hosting this really important conversation. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you, JR. Thank you to you, and thank you for the introduction. And also thank to you all for joining us today. So we are really grateful for your presence and interest. And also we are very inspired by your actions and your common commitment to create a new world, a better world, where no one is left behind. So that's is really just an honor for me to be here, and thank you, JR, again.
Well, Marta, I'll start with the question I think everybody has, which is, what is the Global Solidarity Fund?
Yeah, so this is a good question, a 1 million question. The Global Solidarity Fund exists to catalyze high-level global partnership on behalf of the most vulnerable. And what does global partnership mean for us? So the Global Solidarity Fund really forged partnership alliances across three different sectors. First, businesses, so the private sectors. And the second, faith-based organizations and institutions, starting with the Catholic Church, that too often are not recognized as a key players when the developing community look for partnership. And the third sector is the global developing community itself, which include, of course, UN agencies, international organizations like Gavi. We will have a Guillermo Grosso for Gavi today in the second panel of the discussion, but also global movement like the Global Citizens. That's also very important to allow to share messages to billions of people and across different audiences, like we did for the Pope Francis during the last Vax live concert.
You know, Marta, I think in our experience, at least in this work, we find that people have a pretty strong sense of who the private sector actors are. We've heard of like the great work of organizations like Unilever and Salesforce, Bank of America, DHL, a host of others, many of whom have actually joined us for this conversation, and we'll hear from here shortly. And then, I think many of us are familiar with things like the Gavi and the Global Fund and the World Health Organization. But I think the faith-based sector is a little bit more mysterious to many of us. Could you talk? I know there's, in particular, two very distinct places where you partner with both the Vatican and then sisters around the world. Could you say a little bit more about exactly who are we partnering with when it comes to the faith-based world, at least at the start? I know it's going to become more broad. But to start with, we've got some pretty powerful partners involved.
Yeah, that's right. I completely agree. I've been working in the development field for 20 years and with different organizations, and I always been impressed by the work of the Catholic Church, particularly, but also other faith and religious leaders in the development field. But often they are the unheard heroes. They are working on the front line, and they are really working and reaching the most vulnerable people around the world. But no one really understands how much they are big the network is extended. And also there is a very interesting element on the global with the faith-based organization, in particular the Catholic Church. So they have really big moral leadership that is in this year. Of course, I don't know any better leaders that Pope Francis that can really guide and influence the global development, the global dialogue. But we have also more than 1 million brothers and sisters working on the front line with the most marginalized in the most remote areas. And they're all interconnected. So is a fantastic web of people that are very resilient and very knowledgeable. They know the people they work with. They also have, of course, a spiritual approach and holistic approach to the people that can really give and provide much more to the development community than other actors that are the usual one, UN and other organizations and NGOs and other key players, but to different ones.
That's great. It's a perfect segue too, by the way. So why now? Why this event? Why now? I mean, I know your core mission is really focused on marginalized populations, in particular refugees, thinking about job creation, job training, education, figuring out how to mobilize the local church and these incredibly powerful sisters that are on the ground doing the work now, right? I think Joanne Dryles from the Gates Foundation calls them the doers of development. I think it's probably one of the best frames I've sort of ever heard. But today we're talking about something that's just, it's not outside of your mission because all of these things matter and you're building a coalition for the sake of development, but you didn't build Global Solidarity Fund for the sake of vaccines. But the issue is pressing. So why now? Why this event, and why is this such an important conversation that we believe we should bring the faith-based sector to bear?
Yeah, so I think that today's conversation is really an example of a GSF catalytic power. And we have businesses, we have the church, and also the church. I say that we're representative of the Vatican, but also of the sisters in the ground. We have the international organization through Gavi, and we have the philanthropy. So we have Jos Rell from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And that is really just a whole thinking about new solutions. So sharing knowledge, share experience, lesson learned, and finding new solutions together to cope with these new pandemics that is just extraordinary times for us. Just really change everything in the life of everyone. So this is really GSF in action. So we just applied what we are, so our DNA to a new solutions, to a new problem, a new solution. I'm like looking all the time on the solution before the problem. That is my nature. But and this is exactly the moment. And that's today we have, last week we had the G20 Global Health Summit. And this week, just yesterday, the assembly of the WHO kickoff, and we have the Secretary General Tedros just speak very loudly about the need to increase the support for COVAX, and so to have a much more equitable distribution of the vaccines. So it's not just a question of respond to a challenge that everyone is living, but it's just a timing to just be together and work together to have a unified answer.
Well, so for our participants and those that are kind of joining us around the world, the first panel is focused on trust in the vaccine. So you've got a member of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Unilever, we've got Cardinal Turkson, all discussing how we build trust in the vaccine globally. The second panel is really thinking through unique ways to distribute the vaccine and doing so through partnerships with the private sector. So now we'll move on to those panels and we'll see you at the end.
Good morning, everybody. It's so exciting to be moderating such a distinguished panel. And I'd like to start by having everyone talk a little bit about what's at stake with the public trust in the distribution of the vaccine, and how do we address that?
Yeah, well, in some cases, we're fighting two big challenges. One is the pandemic itself and the havoc that it's wreaking economically and health perspective. And the other is the battle against misinformation. I mean, there have been concerted efforts, organized efforts to try to sow doubt about the efficacy, the safety of vaccines. And so public trust is vital, because if we're going to get to a level of vaccination where communities are allowed to get back to normal, you need to get upwards of 70% of people inoculated. And, in some cases, battling the lack of public trust is a role that we didn't anticipate having to play. I'm sure others on this call, but is really vital now. And so we need to shore up people's confidence that these vaccines are safe, they're effective. And that's taking a much bigger role for all of us as vaccines are getting rolled out, and in some cases in a great way. But we really need to kind of now make sure that that confidence is boosted in addition to getting vaccines out more readily.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Rebecca, would you like to comment on the question?
Building on what Joe was just saying around this public trust in vaccines and how do we do that? I think building public trust is absolutely paramount. It really does underpin a country's successful vaccination program and hopefully a bit more of a return to normal life. Joe talked obviously about the important issues around access and equity, absolutely critical. But I think as important as providing the actual product as well is also thinking about how to educate and encourage people to want to proactively engage with it and to use it. We've done quite a lot of work in that space over the years as the world's largest soap manufacturer through our Lifebuoy program. So looking at how do you create behaviour change programs that really target children and new mothers in countries with high rates of infant mortality that is caused by poor hygiene. So one of the things that we've been doing over the past few years with Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunisations, is a program working together with them that is targeted at new parents, because we see the dual interventions of a vaccination and really good everyday hygiene as absolutely critical when it comes to saving lives. So Unilever brings in expertise in marketing and behaviour change, public health principles, and of course Gavi with their ability to deploy the vaccines at scale. So we ran that program for 3 years in India in rural communities through community engagements, door-to-door interactions, also adopting mobile technology to be able to remind parents when and how to wash their hands and remind them about the important dates that were coming up in their children or babies' vaccination schedules. We found now, when we look back at the results, parents 1.5 times more likely to wash their hands, doubling the amount of times that they were getting their children immunized against really killer diseases, things like rotavirus. So I think that collaboration between the public sector, government, and the private sector, and the role that we can play together in helping to build trust in communities is absolutely essential. But of course, to Joe's point, all of this needs to be backed up by much better and equitable access to the vaccines in the first place.
Thank you, Rebecca. Cardinal Turkson, would you share your thoughts about building trust in the vaccine and how we address that?
I think it's so very important that we build trust. This, as has been observed, has been the most effective way of dealing with this pandemic so far. I happen to know that there are a lot of traditional, methods and traditional, medication produced. I know that Cameroon has a case that puts together whatever, but still the vaccines remain the one medical means accessible to the human race all over the world and all. So the challenge I think we're facing is with perception and people's prejudices. And we know that there's a lot of conspiracy theory out there. which is, keeping people away from the virus. I know that. I don't know whether it's good to be concrete and specific here. Like, I've seen video clips of from the Nation of Islam, encouraging even African heads of state to not allow whatever people to be vaccinated and all of this. And then I'm also aware that the present government in the United States has mounted a campaign to disabuse the minds of people about reservations they may have to this vaccine. Latin American campaign is mounted by cardinals from US and Latin America, all to help people to create confidence in the vaccine. The same thing is happening, I know, in several parts in Africa, where local church leaders have also mounted similar campaigns to help disabuse the minds of people about whatever reservations they may have. But all of this for me, for where I am and what I do, also teaches a lesson. And the lesson is not to give chance to people to develop such perceptions and such conspiracy theories. Because people refer to past episodes where vaccines have been negatively used, to impact the lives of people. So, in view of situations that we're facing now, it's so very important for the medical and pharmaceutical industry to keep the integrity of scientific products, respect them, and so build confidence in every product that comes out of the pipeline.
Thank you, Cardinal Turkson. I'd love for you all to talk about, what can companies do? How can this be, directly addressed? Are there things that, what would you suggest, to try to, disabuse and dispel some of the misinformation?
Okay. We all know. Before the SDGs, were kind of officially launched in 2015 in September by the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon. It had been preceded by an event in Addis Ababa, where an attempt was made to lobby private capital and public capital and all, put them all together to find a way of financing the SDGs. I think we need to do something similar with this pandemic. We need to find a way of bringing private and public, monies or capital together to do this. We know there are several initiatives, I think, from our side. We've joined advocacy groups in campaigning for suspension of debts, payment of debt for poor countries, so they can use the monies to support and help deal with the pandemic in their local populations. We've joined campaigns about even them, kind of suspending international property rights to allow other local pharmaceutical companies to produce vaccines to help deal with this. So there are a lot of campaigns. We know that some of them have met and faced resistance from governments and from companies and all. But if the real interest and initiative is in controlling this virus, knowing that as long as there's one individual with a virus in the world, we are now safe, then we should be able to put aside some private interests and all of that, and help promote what will lead to a global health, agenda and program for all of us. So my appeal then would be to encourage the big companies, the big, firms and all of that, to join in putting private and public capital monies together to promote the inoculation, vaccination, whatever program that it takes to keep humanity healthy.
Thank you. Rebecca, may I jump to you with the same question?
The first thing that we've tried to do as a company is encourage, and Alan Jope, our CEO, sends out weekly letters, emails to all of our 150,000 employees around the world, encouraging trust in the vaccines and really encouraging people where there are government programs already available to sign up and to get the vaccine as soon as they can. Clearly, unfortunately, that isn't the case in every country in the world yet. So where employees haven't yet been able to have access to the vaccine through government programs, we've been working on a number of different public-private sector partnerships to look at how can we better facilitate administrating vaccines for people, in partnership though, of course, always with government and health authorities and hospitals across the country, and not circumnavigating those guidelines. I think that is an important point to make. But there's different things that we can do. For example, in the Philippines, we're involved in a couple of business consortiums, so lots of different businesses working together in a program that's supported by the government, which acquires vaccinations with a 50% donation to governments and then 50% for employers. So employees in our offices who are working on frontline work, so making essential items, etc., would be part of that program, and also looking at how we can make sure people like our third trade, third party partners, etc., are involved. Then I think there's other things that we can do as well. So we run in a number of countries around the world what we call a KAP study, a knowledge, attitudes and practices survey, in advance of a vaccination campaign, so that we can try and understand what are the specific factors that might be driving vaccine hesitancy in a particular country, so we can then try and tailor the messages that we're sending out so that they are culturally sensitive and they land much more appropriately with the audience. So, for example, in the Middle East, absolutely essential that a vaccine is compliant with halal regulations. Otherwise, employees wouldn't feel comfortable about receiving the vaccination. So things like that, really making sure that not just the actual process itself, but also the messaging behind it is really tailored at helping people to overcome some of the fears that they may have. And I think the last part is really thinking about, where appropriate, where companies can use their brand. For example, Lifebuoy did a public service announcement last month in India that was about all different private sector companies working together. It's called In Your Hands. So imploring everybody everywhere to wear their masks, to get vaccinated, socially distance, and to wash their hands with soap and water. So just important generic health messages that aren't around any particular one brand, but they're just encouraging general take up. And again, I think how do we also partner with people like UNICEF, with people like Gavi, to support governments in lower middle income countries around the procurement of vaccines. So we're looking at the moment around different options that will help vaccines be deployed more quickly and more efficiently, but always, as I said, in line with the country's national vaccination program.
Thank you. That's powerful information, Rebecca. Joe, your thoughts about leveraging company assets for vaccine distribution?
Yeah, well, if there's one thing that we've learned, is that everyone has a role to play in getting us out of this pandemic. I mean, for many people, this has been a horrendous health crisis, but it's also been an economic crisis for so many, and jobs lost, and countries that, particularly low middle income countries that don't have the ability to stimulate their economies, it's been a real challenge. So I think we all have a role to play. I think Rebecca laid out really well the kinds of examples and what leadership looks like. Unilever's been an incredible ally in this fight that we all have to wage to defeat COVID. I think there's a couple of other things that I would highlight. One is just being agents of good information distribution, and you've seen partnerships with Comcast, NBC Universal, which has sponsored in the U.S. Efforts to try to make sure that information on vaccines and where to get vaccines is made available using their massive distribution platforms. A great partnership. You see other companies stepping up, leveraging their know-how. So, as Rebecca mentioned, there's a number of ways that companies can do that. There's innovative partnerships even between rivals like Google and Apple, which are trying to use Bluetooth technology to give people a better sense of with this COVID exposure notification on ways to communities can better protect themselves. And also just on the question of how to leverage supply chains and distribution channels, I think there's a great opportunity for companies to also provide some of that expertise. Just because vaccines may make it to ports doesn't necessarily mean those vaccines actually get into the arms of people. So we have a big distribution challenge in some parts of the world where the corporate sector can play a huge role. And finally, companies can contribute. We hope that there's a willingness and some generosity there, particularly those that for different reasons have benefited in a kind of counter-cyclical way in the last 12 months or so, where they can really step up and help make sure that they can contribute to ending the pandemic more quickly by giving. and asking their employees as well if they want to be part of a solution. There are platforms like Go Give One, which was just launched recently with the WHO Foundation, which is an opportunity for people that have gotten a vaccine to also make that benefit available to someone living in a poor part of the world. So there are great schemes like that are emerging, and it just shows that partnership is going to be what ultimately helps us get through this crisis.
Absolutely. It's so interesting when you think about all of the vendors that so many companies have, even if they were to permeate that message out through their vendors and get their vendors to partner as well. I think that could, pass, things along exponentially. Thank you for your
Absolutely.
My next question is, how is the leadership of the Vatican and the moral authority of the Pope driving public trust?
From over here in the Vatican, when this pandemic broke, of course, the initial response from the Vatican, from the Pope Francis himself, was to engage in distributing ventilators and equipment and stuff like that. But sooner or later, it became clear that we couldn't go far with this individual intervention. So that's when a commission was built up, and the commission decided to work through 5, working groups. One, making contact with the local churches all around the world to find out how they were dealing with the conflict, with the pandemic. So to learn from situations on the ground, what the experience of the pandemic was, how they're dealing with it, and how the Vatican or the Holy See might be of support. So that was our first move. The second move was to establish, to create a company, a group that was to do research, to study the impact of the pandemic on labor, on economics, on ecology, and on public health systems. So to give us an idea, what exactly is happening and how we may think about. We've never really used the language of recovery, but our language has just been how can we emerge out, emerge out of this crisis in a better way, because the language here in the Vatican is that the pandemic of the health pandemic is revealed a lot of other social pandemics, like inequality in access to medical care, inequality, all of those. So our thing is, how can we help, our world of humanity emerge, from this crisis with a system that is free of these inequalities and all the challenges that we've observed. So that's what we're doing. And the way of going about this is, again, using the network of the church, since the church, wherever the church is, to make the local bishops and all of that agents of the message of solidarity, compassion, care, and reaching out to lend support to whatever group there is. In some cases, we've had to feed people because the lockdown has made a lot of people hungry. In some other cases, we've had to facilitate the spread and the reach of virus and find alternative medication and cure in the absence of the vaccination or the vaccines. In some other cases, it's become a case of strengthening health institutions to be able to deal with the pandemic itself. And in some other cases, we've also had to protect the personnel themselves in rendering this service. So the approach of the church has been several, but all of it is basically to reach out to express the compassion of the church for humanity stricken by a pandemic over which it has no control. While we engage in study sessions to evaluate the impact of this on all the social structures I talked about, labor, economics, environment, and public healthcare systems, and to see how we can emerge out of this crisis with a better, more robust social healthcare systems and structures.
Thank you, Cardinal. I asked that question very specifically about the Vatican. I'd love to know, Joe and Rebecca, I'll start with Rebecca, if you have any comment. Obviously, the faith community anchors community. So whether it's a church, whether it's a synagogue, whatever sort of institution. Yeah. So I want to reframe that question in a different way, rather than just focusing on the Vatican, and give Rebecca.
Okay. No, certainly we're working together. Mm-hmm. We're working together with other faith groups. Because when we leave the Vatican and get down out there to local churches, these do not exist as insular social entities. They are in touch with a whole lot of other faith-based groups. If you want a concrete example, I can give, since I'm from Ghana, probably one I know best. There is the relationship between the Catholic Church and the Christian Council of Ghana, which is made up of all the Protestant churches. And then once a year, they meet in May, they just did. And to that meeting invited the chief imam, so the Islamic community, to come together to see how they can lend support to the government efforts to get the vaccine rolled out. The hurdle or the big obstacle came because the AstraZeneca vaccine, which were being used in Ghana, came from India. So when the present, problem in India began, it just meant that several people in Ghana have had the first dose, and they were expecting the second dose. But the second dose is not coming because of the problem in India now. So the government in Ghana is looking for alternative ways of getting, getting people to, have the second dose and all of that. And therefore, as you would expect, people are beginning to resist. Now, we started with AstraZeneca. We don't want to, use some other vaccine and all of that. So that's what they're dealing with. But certainly, all the efforts are ecumenical, different Christian groups, and interreligious, interfaith, Christian groups and non-Christian groups working together.
Thank you. I know we have a short amount of time left, and so I wanted to make sure that I offer the opportunity for each of you to offer any words or any comments related to this important topic, to the audience that's watching. So Rebecca, can I start with you? I know you have lots of thoughts about this. I'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Sonia. I think building off of what Cardinal Turkson was talking about, and this unique capability of faith communities around the world working together. I mean, we've seen the extraordinary power of the Catholic Church in being a leader in this area. And of course, as Cardinal Turkson said, actually the same thing is happening. Lots of different religions, lots of different cultures around the world looking to their community or religious leaders to help them. So I think one of the interesting experiences that we had, and I think really shows how this comes together, is a partnership we set up with the UK government, where we set up a platform, the Hygiene and Behaviour Change Coalition, that had 100 million euros worth of hygiene products from Unilever, plus behaviour change expertise, with the ability of the UK government to reach out into different countries around the world. And we set up a program where we had 21 different implementing partners to roll out programs around good access and understanding around the importance of practicing good hygiene, essentially good health, hands, face masks, all of those key messages that are really, really important. And one of the partners that we worked with was World Vision, who we partnered with in the DRC, because we wanted to really understand how faith communities can be such a key platform for us when we were trying to get these messages out all over the world. So what World Vision did was to train, I think it was about 800 faith leaders, really looking at how might they be able to debunk some of perhaps the rumours that were circulating around COVID and around the importance of trying to combat the spread of COVID. And of course, when the time comes to be able to get access to a vaccine. So they did things, for example, like looking at the scriptures to try and address some of those issues. They also looked at how, for example, they could distribute things through church radio stations, how we could link into community leaders. So just as one example, it reached about 6 million people, I think, that program in the DRC. But I think what it really taught us to understand was the huge power of working with faith communities because of the important role that they hold in the community and because of how influential they can be in helping to demystify and debunk perhaps some of these myths that exist, which of course stop people potentially from protecting themselves, their families and their communities, and of course I think exist in some areas of the world as well around vaccines and around hesitancy on vaccines.
Excellent, thank you. Joe, may I throw over to you? Same question.
Sure. Thanks, Sonia, for the question. And you talked about the role of Pope Francis. I think it's also great that he has advisors like Cardinal Turkson who can counsel and provide that wisdom, including your experience in Ghana, because I think now more than ever, it's really important that voices from the front lines and making sure that the Vatican has the ability to reach across so many different parts of the world is critical. And I'd say too, I mean, the Vaccine for All report that came out of the commission that Cardinal Turkson mentioned is a fantastic document. And for one reason, because its willingness to tackle head on some of the controversial issues and not shy away from things that might be uncomfortable. And so I really commend the efforts that you put into it and really the contributions that came out of that. It's another example of the Vatican's ability to really convene leaders from all over the world, but all around different faiths as well, and to come together in a moment where we really need global solidarity. So I was really pleased with that. I know that there have been subsequent communications, a letter signed by 150 faith leaders that really called on governments, leaders from around the world to come together and put aside any differences and say there are some things that really demand that we act as one human body. And this was one of those efforts. I think that was really remarkable. I also think that the role of faith leaders, we've seen it happen in a negative way. And I remember in 2014, our foundation was working very closely in Nigeria. And there were a number of faith leaders who talked about the potential dangers of polio vaccine, which caused a lot of concern amongst people living in Nigeria. And the efforts to eradicate polio in Nigeria were set back. But fortunately, it was faith leaders coming together with others that really countered a lot of those myths and suspicions, and came back, and Nigeria has now been certified polio free. So it's a remarkable example, and just shows you how important the role and the messages of leaders of different faiths can profoundly impact the course of health and diseases like polio. Pope Francis is an amazing voice, and it's so important right now. I know that I was watching with my kids the recent Vax Live concert, and when Pope Francis came out and delivered his message, you knew it was a very different kind of event, and he was appealing to a different audience, perhaps, that I think really received that incredible message that he conveyed, and thought this is in fact a time to come together. So I don't think the role can be. The role is just so vital and so important right now.
Thank you. I'm going to throw in one final question.
Oh.
The role of the Global Solidarity Fund. I'm going to jump to Joe. If you jump in, and then I'll come back to you, Cardinal.
Sure. Well, I would say the Global Solidarity Fund, if it hadn't been created, we would probably be needing to create it right now. So I'm glad that there was the foresight and the vision years ago to put the GSF together. It's playing a vital role. And in the wake of COVID, we'll also have probably an even more important role of trying to build back communities in a stronger, a better way. So I'm really fortunate that we have the GSF that's going to play a fundamental role in making sure we live up to that aspiration of building back better.
Amazing. Rebecca?
Yes, I echo what Joe was saying. I think as we move into this rehabilitation phase post the pandemic, it's critically important that we can help people to get their livelihoods back up and running. So job creation opportunities, particularly in those communities that have been so hard hit by COVID. So one of the great things that the GSF is doing is exactly that, looking at how can we work with social enterprises, how can we work with business entrepreneurs at a local level, so that we can try and get the economies up and running again, and really, as much as possible, try and go back to some sort of semblance of life before the pandemic. So I think that strong recovery element is key, and GSF is very much on top of that.
Excellent. And Cardinal Turkson.
Yes, okay, we cannot. So I think I joined Mr. Carrer and Rebecca for Covenant and Global Solidarity Fund. We've known the group for a while here in the Vatican. I remember probably 5 or so years back when the group first came up with the idea of coming together to provide funding for a whole lot of activities. I think at the first meeting, I think Melinda was on. Okay, so they, we had a chance of hosting, receiving them here in the dicastery of the Vatican to talk about this possibility, and of course we're glad that it's come to birth and that it's supporting our own local efforts to accompany local churches and local communities about their response to the COVID. They support a lot of our work in a big way. Helping us engage experts in the different areas to do whatever they do, and helping also to find a means of getting our work going. So we're grateful for their assistance and commend them heartily too.
Thank you. Well, Joe, Rebecca, Cardinal Turkson, thank you all for an incredible panel and discussion. I wish you all well with everything that you're doing, and I wish you all a fantastic day today. Thank you.
What a powerful conversation on the need for trust around the vaccine and the need to leverage moral authority, global institutions to build that trust around the world. I think listening to Joe Sorrell talk about watching the Holy Father and his comments at the Vax Live concert with his children and talking about how this is a different kind of message, it really made us think we should hear this from the Holy Father himself. And to that end, let's hear it from him.
Dios Creador infunde en nuestros corazones un espíritu nuevo y generoso para abandonar nuestros individualismos y promover el bien común. Un espíritu de justicia que nos movilice para asegurar el acceso universal a la vacuna y la suspensión temporaria de derechos de propiedad intelectual. Un espíritu de comunión que nos permita generar un modelo económico diferente, más inclusivo, justo, sustentable. Evidentemente que estamos viviendo una crisis. La pandemia nos metió en crisis a todos, pero no se olviden que de una crisis no salimos igual. O salimos mejores o peores. El problema está en tener la inventiva para buscar caminos que sean mejores.
Again, just powerful words from the Holy Father. Now we're going to move on to a panel focused on the role of unique partnerships to equitably distribute this vaccine around the world.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, depending on which part of the world you are joining us from. My name is Susan Myers, and I represent Goal 17 Partners, an organization that is about driving business solutions to support sustainability, equality, and accessibility. Goal 17 Partners is excited to be partnering with the Global Solidarity Fund, not just on this panel discussion today, but on other opportunities that will bring the private sector together with GSF's incredible network in service of marginalized populations around the world. And I've had the opportunity to get to know the Global Solidarity Fund over these past few months, and I see them not only as a valuable source of information about what's happening in communities around the world, because they engage directly with the people that we are trying to assist, but also as a critical actor and partner in bringing about the change we know needs to happen to drive response and recovery to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm really pleased to be moderating this discussion, which brings together an incredible wealth of expertise on how to tackle the most urgent issue at hand in the world today, which is, of course, the equitable distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine, including to marginalized populations who have not yet received access to it. So I want to start with Guillaume to help us, of course, set the overall context for today's discussion, given the role that you play. Help us understand where we are globally when it comes to vaccine rollout.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I want to step back a little bit because I'm going to tell you about COVAX, of course, which is the global vaccine response to the pandemic and how COVAX is helping to vaccinate the world. But I want just for all of us to go back 1 year ago, February, March, when the pandemic really started in 2020. And at that time, we had the biggest fear in this world was that the vaccines would be basically staying in a handful of countries and not reaching out to everybody that needs them urgently. So that's what led international community to get together and create what we now call COVAX, which is the vaccine answer to the pandemic. Now, as we speak today, more than 67 million vaccine doses have been shipped to more than 124 participants, a lot of them in developing countries, emerging economies, to help fight the pandemic with those who really are the most exposed. So the health workers, of course, the elderly, people with comorbidities. But what I want to really insist on is that in history, in the past 10, 20, 30 years of vaccination, it was never the case that we could go so fast from a new vaccine being invented to that new vaccine coming in the hands of the people in the developing countries. With COVAX, it took less than 3 months from the very first shot going in the arms of the most advanced countries in the world in terms of the fight against the pandemic to the arms of the poorest people in the developing countries. Now that's a record, of course, and we should all be very proud of it. But the road is very long because our objective is to get to almost 30% coverage so that the pandemic becomes tamed at the global level. And for this, of course, as in many places, the essence is going to be finding the money so that we can lock in all those doses. We need to lock in 1.8 billion doses of vaccines so that we can distribute those doses before the end of the year and protect the world against the pandemic. So that's in a nutshell where we are. So a lot of work has been done already, but of course, the road is very long.
Thank you, Guillaume, and to Sister Pat Murray to also help us, ground this discussion in the most important issues, which is, of course, how the pandemic and the lack of equitable access to a vaccine is affecting people and communities around the world. I know your organization works directly with many of these individuals, including those who are perhaps the most marginalized, those who had a number of challenges in their daily lives already before this pandemic hit. What does the lack of vaccines equity mean for people's lives, especially those who are most in need? What are some of the things you're seeing through these communities that you work with?
Thank you very much, Susan. Obviously, the Catholic sisters who work on the ground in healthcare, but also in community development and with various groups, see the impact very much of those who have not received vaccines and the vulnerability of millions of people and the deaths that we've already seen. And I think the people who are most affected are often women and children and the elderly. I've certainly heard heartbreaking stories of people who are trying to look for either protection materials or oxygen or getting the vaccine itself, who despair, who don't know where to go. Systems are not well organized. But equally, those who've got the disease and have survived it are seeing that this disease has long-term effects and serious impact on vital organs such as heart, lungs, brain, and kidney. So there's a long-term medical need for those who have survived. Not to mention the severe economic impact. And that's happening at every level. Here at UISG, we've been distributing over $2 million to communities, sisters and their communities who have been badly affected, who don't have food to survive on, who don't have ordinary medical care. So it has had a huge impact on livelihood. People, their jobs gone, leaving from urban areas, returning to rural places, having very little ways of surviving. So there is a real food and security issue that we have to attend to. And obviously, just to mention the long-term recovery, which is going to be much more difficult in some countries, and particularly with low-income groups, low-income countries, and with families who are living in poverty within developed world countries. So there are multiple factors to be attended to.
Thank you, Sister Pat. And as we pivot a bit to some different ways to think about responding to those needs. Both of our private sector companies represent those that, you know, I've had the opportunity to see in action due to their deep commitments to addressing humanitarian needs and also longer term goals around sustainable development. I want to ask each of them to comment a bit on how they see their sector having responded to this urgent issue of COVID-19. And what are, you know, some of the bright spots? What are some of the things we've learned about how the private sector can engage in addressing global problems? So maybe starting with you, Thomas, you know, given the role you play at DHL, which is of course seen as a logistical powerhouse and getting goods and other things to people who need them.
Yeah, thank you, Susan, and thank you for having me here. You know, our company purpose is connecting people, improving lives. And I think in the last couple of months, it never has come forward so much and intense. And working in the life science sector since 14 years, I think what we've seen the last year is phenomenal in terms of the challenges, but also in terms of the collaboration. And if I would echo on what Guillaume said a little bit earlier, I think as a global community, we can be very proud of what has been achieved in a short period of time, starting from the pharmaceutical companies and R&D and how fast vaccines came to the market, but also then how fast there were agreements, planning arrangements done between the private and the public sector to really get the product out to the market. And we have been just last week launched our second white paper on the whole thing. And we took some analogies within sport as well. And we said, this is more a marathon and not a sprint. Why? Because 1 billion doses have been shipped, something starting early May. But in order to have herd immunity, another 9 billion doses need to be shipped. And that only can be achieved in really working closely together. And we as a company have started the preparation very early in fall last year. And, you know, typically we work with pharmaceutical and medical device companies, but we also very early reached out to governments. We reached out to NGOs working closely with the likes of UNICEF, World Food Programme, the African Union, to basically build also plans to bring product into low and middle income areas and the people who deserve it the most. And I think we're at the start. It's good to see that first shipments have been done, but we see this really as something that will go on for the next couple of 2-3 years, certainly. Yeah. Also talking about booster shots, mutants, and so forth, right? Vaccination of children, there is more to do.
Great, thank you, Thomas, and thank you to you and your colleagues for the production of those white papers. They've been a great resource to us at Goal 17 Partners, and I know to many others as well.
Excellent.
Charlotte, I'd like to turn to you. You know, how do you think both your company and the many other companies you work with, your clients, your other partners have done when it comes to responding?
So thank you, Susan, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. And I'm sorry about the background noise. Firstly, I do think it's important to say that we have seen such amazing engagement between government, civil society, and the corporate sector in a way that perhaps we have never seen before. And I think that that's an amazing outcome of what has been a devastating occurrence with COVID. The other thing that we've really seen is it's not just been about money. It's not just been about being asked for donations. It's really, you know, building on what Thomas has said, it's about using expertise to solve the challenges and to leverage the expertise that various organizations have in a place that makes sense with them. A great example of that is our work with Gavi and helping build the platform that we've just delivered with them. But also, it's really been about enabling people and organizations to contribute in the ways that they can and to bring everybody on this journey. One of the things that we hear so much as a corporate is from our employees. How do I get involved? How do I contribute to this? How does it become more than just my company? And this is why I love the WHO Foundation, Gavi initiative, the Go Give One campaign. Not only do we get to participate as a corporate with our matching, we're bringing our entire ecosystem to bear in support of the campaign, but importantly,
we can get every single person that works in these organizations also behind the campaign. The more individuals, the more advocacy that corporates can bring to bear, the easier we can help make the rollout. But also, most importantly, one of the biggest obstacles that we're going to come to is as the more developed countries start to come through the pandemic, we can't let mind share be left behind. So we can't have companies thinking, we're coming through, so therefore we're getting back to normal, and forgetting all those millions, billions of people that still need support, still need equitable access to vaccines that we've already had. And by engaging our employees, by engaging our interior ecosystems, we keep that mind share there. The other thing that I've been really heartened about seeing is actually the amount of company-to-company partnerships. For example, a plane just left the US last night, which was a partnership between Salesforce and HSBC, taking thousands of ventilators to India. Competition, the walls have come down. Organizations working together in ways that they've never worked together before to deliver relief and support in ways that we've not seen before. And so great learnings, but also great innovations and great templates for us to move forward with.
Thank you, Charlotte. And you teed up perfectly the next issue I wanted to turn to, which is diving in a little bit deeper around the innovations and the new ways of working that have been unleashed by this pandemic. I want to give, Guillaume and Sister Pat an opportunity to respond a bit to what you just heard from Thomas and Charlotte. What kind of ideas are elicited by hearing about some of the ways that the private sector has responded and collaborated within the sector and others in response to COVID-19? Guillaume, I'll start with you. I know harnessing innovation is very much a part of your work at Gavi. Both what are some of the ways you've been doing that in response already, but what are some of the other ideas you would have in response to what you just heard?
Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you, Charlotte and Thomas, for the support. I absolutely agree with what you said. Actually, if you look at, if you unpack, in a sense, our needs when it comes to fighting this pandemic at the global level, first and foremost, I mentioned it, of course, we're in a race against the clock to lock in the vaccines with manufacturers, which is about buying millions and millions of doses of vaccines. So for that, to start with, the private sector can help us. Our goal is to raise an additional $150 million from the private sector. Charlotte mentioned one of the initiatives, which is the one we're running with the WHO Foundation. Gavi's private sector partners, in fact, have already stepped up to the plate and proved to be prompt donors. Early funding, of course, is extremely vital to us. In fact, out of the $150 million that we're trying to raise from the private sector with the private sector, there was recently an event with the Global Citizen where a number of corporates also came together on the day. $61 million were found to help purchase the vaccine. So that, of course, is extremely powerful and important. But beyond that, you would say, given the enormous impact that the pandemic has had on all our lives and livelihoods, private sector support is also a moral imperative for those companies who can afford to contribute. But it also makes good business sense, because the pandemic has challenged many businesses. Bringing the pandemic to an end also means, besides saving lives, it means saving livelihoods. It means saving businesses, really. So we have with COVAX one of the best tools at hand to avoid adding an economic crisis, in a sense, on top of the ongoing health crisis, and for ensuring a return to the global economic growth that we all all like to see. So we've had several tools that we've put in place at Gavi, and that now we're using in the context of COVAX, such as, for instance, the Gavi Matching Fund, which is, the matching funds are these funding mechanisms, public and private, which are designed to incentivize the private sector investments in immunization. And what we use them for is to match private sector contributions, both in cash and in kind, so that we can secure the resources and the expertise that we need. And that brings me very squarely to what Thomas and Charlotte were mentioning, which is that the private sector can help with cash, but it can do a lot more than that on top of cash. We call on corporations, philanthropies, foundations to do advocacy for us, but also to bring expertise and to bring innovation. And in fact, when we want to support countries to roll out something like COVAX and huge amounts of new COVID-19 vaccines, we will need to address some of the big bottlenecks. And for this, business knowledge, business know-how, and expertise is absolutely critical. What are the bottlenecks? Data, being able to plot, to know where people are, to track them, to make sure we know they're vaccinated or not. Logistics, keeping the cold chain to work in very difficult conditions sometimes. And of course, what we call demand generation, which is about making sure that once you have the vaccines, actually people want to get vaccinated so that the vaccines don't stay idle. And for that, what we've seen is that innovation, in fact, needs to be bred in peaceful times, you would say, and then in times of crisis, you find opportunities to build on the existing progress to catalyze innovation. So in Gavi, we have a program called Infuse, which is about bringing entrepreneurs and new solutions into immunization. And through this program, we developed, for instance, drone delivery of vaccines and medicine in developing countries. When COVID struck, we brought a Zipline, for instance, a drone manufacturer, and we immediately switched their service to deliver doses of vaccines, of COVID vaccines, in some countries in Africa. Now that is innovation at the service of solving the current crisis. We're also doing, leveraging biometric technology to uniquely identify and follow up on vaccines on people that have been vaccinated. And that's what we do, for instance, with Simprints, which is a startup that is specialized in this biometric technology. So there's a lot of way in which we can involve the private sector to solve our current problems, and we will need more of it as we move from the millions of COVID-19 doses to the billions of doses, as we expect to do by the end of this year.
Great, thank you, Guillaume. It's good to have moments of inspiration when we're dealing with an issue like that. I know that probably keeps you going as well. And for Sister Pat, I would also love to hear ideas you've had that were elicited by this discussion. In a way, Guillaume just laid out, some ways to harness innovation in private sector at the global level. Are there ideas you have for how you can, work with companies like DHL and Salesforce in addressing some of the bottleneck issues that you see in these local communities that you and your colleagues work in?
Sure, thank you very much. I think, first of all, I'd like to comment on the fact that in this global solidarity, faith-based organizations and the churches have a very important role to play, because I think we have to tackle something that we haven't really mentioned yet, is the whole area of vaccine resistance. And that's a very live issue in many parts of the world. And I hear sisters on the ground saying that in some cases, the resistance is up to 80% in some African countries, some Asian countries. So I think the faith-based organization, and I see the role of Catholic sisters on the ground as, because they're trusted, because they're known, of actually building the information, sharing the information and knowledge. And I think that's where companies can help us by giving us the kind of data in a way that can be delivered. And through the Vatican task force, we're beginning to do that, to roll out information, accurate information, to tackle misinformation, and also to point to the growth and successes that are happening. I think I'd love to see partnerships with organizations whereby the if you like, the infrastructure of the churches, the parishes, the schools, the clinics, the various healthcare centers and so on that are there can be used, and so that the vaccines can be delivered in a way that the training is there for those who are delivering, how to use the vaccines, how they're to be stored, the very basic knowledge that sometimes is missing on the ground. So I think it's this parallel. I also feel that we have to spread the message of vaccine acceptance. I think key people like Pope Francis have spelt this message out clearly. I know as a Catholic Church and many other churches are bringing this message to the ground. So I think it's this dual working together, sharing the surplus of vaccines that are there in countries, I love the fact that we can, at an individual level, contribute to vaccine support through the WHO Foundation. It's something I think that the churches, through schools, through their parish network and so forth, can make it known, so that we really enter into solidarity. Businesses are providing, the human community is supporting this work so that it gets to the people who are most in need, those on the margins of society.
Thank you so much. And thank you for raising the issue of vaccine hesitancy. I was also thinking about the potential of cross-sector collaboration. Sorry if this is maybe a bit of a tough question, but I know you can handle it. If you could design, a collaboration between the types of communities that Sister Pat, her colleagues work with, and companies and some of the partners you work with, what could that look like? What could that look like for people in communities that we know have a lot of needs that aren't currently being addressed?
So I think it's a big question. It's also a great question. And I'll start off with something that Sister Pat mentioned, and that's vaccine resistance. One of the great opportunities that business has right from the very start point is to support both on vaccine resistance and vaccine acceptance. Right now, CEOs are amongst, some of the most trusted voices in the world, and we have to harness that. And that then brings to the start point of the answer of your question. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the benefit that we have right now is that CEOs, businesses, they're not in competition with each other. They're actually in a race to help each other solve the greatest challenge of right now, which is how to vaccinate every single person in the world against COVID. And so what that opens up is a door of opportunity, a door of conversation that enables in whole new ways for people to say, okay, how do we come together to evolve the concept of partnerships and to make change in how we actually work together? By businesses opening that door, and I think by the examples that we've seen so far, and Graham, I love the model that Garvey has. I love the fact that you guys have the innovation. That is as strong a driver to you as any donation, because you see the opportunity that can bring. By really harnessing the examples of positivity that we've seen coming around partnership, we could never have created the vaccine if the silos around partnership hadn't have come down in the way that they had. We can't lose that. So the biggest opportunity that we have right now to drive forward and to make positive change is to actually keep those dialogues open, is to actually keep moving forward on what has already been achieved, and to let every single voice into the conversation. So, how do we as business enable our local communities? And then how do we scale that up to a global conversation? Community has to be at the heart of everything that we're doing. And businesses are seen, 79% of people believe that business has a responsibility to give back to their local communities. Let's harness that. Let's harness the power of these conversations. Let's, bring the openness and the successes that we're seeing back together to start building together, answering some of the questions. What we need from the civil society and from governments is to actually ask us the hard questions that they want answered. And that's the best possible starting point that we can have.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was amazing. And I wanted, we're coming up on time, but I do want to give our other panelists a chance to respond a bit, but also to leave us with any final words and ideas you have coming out of this discussion. So Thomas, I'll turn to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I think absolutely agreement to what the colleagues prior said as well. I think collaboration is the thing that brought us where we are, and it will be the only thing on how we can go forward. And collaboration on all sorts of levels, private and public sector, in terms of exchange, helping each other. We see that in the pharmaceutical industry. We see that in the work we are doing with NGOs as well. I think to what Guillaume said is what we really need to bring together is like this demand flow, the people flow, and the product flow. And that only if that is working seamlessly, then we can have the rollout of vaccination on the planet fast. And I believe there are a lot of things we can do, including private sectors and using technology to inform people about the risk, but also the benefits of vaccination, and that they come to appointments and that they have easy appointments, and that we roll that out also to those countries that now deserve it in Africa and Middle East and in Latin America. Super important. But also collaboration on a small level, like we have now second people to the UNICEF office to help them in planning activities, right? All of these things build up to something that will be a good movement. And I think that is very important to now master the next mile on that journey to get everyone vaccinated very soon. Yeah, back to you, Susan.
Great. And thank you. Guillaume, over to you for any final comments and ideas.
Thank you very much, Susan. And indeed, I mean, I strongly agree on the need to bring everyone under the tent. This is actually Gavi's model. You know, we're the Vaccine Alliance because we think that we always need to find the best placed partners and then create an alliance that is bigger than the sum of its parts. So I think in our case here, to fight COVID, it's never been so true. You know, we need to create this alliance. And I believe that there is a very successful partnership to be struck between companies and faith communities and something like Gavi and COVAX. Because first, it's about voice, it's about advocacy to world leaders, it's about calls for global solidarity, and then it's about funding, and then it's about implementation, and removing all those bottlenecks that we talked about, the data, the logistics, the vaccine hesitancy. And what I've observed is that often innovative partnerships just help achieve several of these goals, and we can literally kill several birds with one stone, if I may say. So for instance, voice and funding, when we had this call for global solidarity with Global Citizen a couple of weeks ago in their Vax Live concert, we saw Pope Francis next to artists, committed citizens, corporations, and all called for the urgency of showing global solidarity. And that message actually resonates with a number of people around the world. And at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, we managed to use this moment where corporates came in to provide significant funding to COVAX. And likewise, you know, I believe that we can bring solutions on the ground. We can bring faith leaders. An example, for instance, we collaborated between Gavi and some faith-based groups in the past who helped with reaching out in the countries. And to Sister Pat's point, actually, really, the church arranged for SMS messages to arrive and talk to the communities in various communities in Africa, and that was really helpful to help pass some of the barriers around. Oh, should I get vaccinated? Is it good for me? Is it something that I should want for my children or for my entourage? I think there's a huge win-win if we bring under the same tent corporations, faith leaders, and organizations like COVAX. So I'm really looking forward to this kind of collaboration.
Thank you. We all are. And Sister Pat, I did want to give you the final word, both to respond to anything you've heard, but just anything else you want our audience and partners to take away from this discussion.
Yeah, following on Guillaume's points, I think I would like to see the establishment of centers where this public-private, faith-based partnership was very visible, and where we really listened to the fears of people on the ground, particularly those who are at the margins of society, and found the ways of reassuring them, but also that these vaccine centers would be places where their competence and their integrity can be validated. And these can be raised up and shown, used as examples in various regions and sectors of the world. And I do believe it's in working together that we want to reach everyone, want to reach the level of herd immunity that will protect us all. And there's something, it's a very special moment, I think, in the life of the world, where something that threatens us at so many different levels is calling us to a new way of being community. I just want to thank each sector for the role that we're playing, because often we're separate. We've been separated for various reasons, and we work in our own paths. But this is calling us and saying to us again and again, you know, we all need to be together for all to be saved. So I think a great debt of gratitude is owed to all the partners who are part of this initiative. And this will bring, I think, a better world, a more thoughtful world, and a world where we really will look and see what does our neighbour need. Because in looking after the neighbour, we're looking after everybody.
I couldn't think of more perfect words to end on. You gave me the chills a little bit. So thank you for that. And thank you also for the very actionable idea of these centers, which I think also seems like one that we can all work together to implement. So, and I know Goal 17 partners will be committed to working with you and the other organizations represented here on this challenge. And if I can speak on behalf of the Global Solidarity Fund, I'm quite sure that they will also.
Wow, what a set of incredible conversations about the opportunity, the need that we have to build trust around the vaccine, and then the power of partnerships to distribute this vaccine to the most marginalized populations.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was an excellent conversation, and I'm so grateful to everyone who participated. And for me, it's also every time I heard these people at that level to talk on importance of the partnership is like a sort of confirmation of the assumption that we had when we created GSF. Based on what happened today, we can really define 2 or 3 areas on hesitancies, on trainings, on also having CEOs a little working together with other organizations like Global Citizens or the Vatican for advocacy, and or also having their employees to be more active in against the hesitancies, just taking the shot in itself, but also to spread the news to other people that are across their life.
So just to repeat kind of what I heard and sort of the call to action. First, learn more about Global Solidarity Fund. We welcome your interest. We welcome your questions. We welcome your partnership. The world is in need of this kind of alliance now more so than ever. That's number 1. Number 2, the vaccine and really building back specifically from COVID. Hopefully, this conversation sparked ideas. It sparked thoughts that you might have, maybe even assets or solutions that you could bring to the table. And we could help you do that. So please do not hesitate. As Marta rightly said, please reach out to Handshake, reach out to Global Solidarity Fund, and we will steward an introduction to one of the participants so that you are able to offer up these solutions specifically focused on getting this vaccine into the most marginalized populations around the world. And then thirdly, as Marta kind of kindly gave a nod to, there's a lot more to come from the Global Solidarity Fund, focused on some of the world's most marginalized populations, leveraging some of the world's most powerful institutions for the sake of truly seeing equity across global development. In particular, be on the lookout this summer for a real conversation around how the private sector can bring innovative solutions to educating and helping creating job opportunities for refugees around the world. That's what's next. I would say that history has brought us to this moment, a moment when, and in fact, if you look backwards, anytime the world has been put on pause, the way that we've been put on pause for the last 18 months, when we come back, we think and we see differently. We actually see in a way with our heart, with our souls. We're no longer just seeing with our minds. We're no longer running so fast that we don't have time to actually access that part of our identity where we actually think about what we believe and about the role that faith-based institutions might play in society. We are now in one of those moments. Global Solidarity Fund has been created for a moment such as this, and we welcome your partnership as we move forward. Marta, participants, all of those who are observing this, thank you so much for this conversation. We look forward to the work that the Global Solidarity Fund will do in the months and years to come. Marta, thank you so much.
Thank you all.